Playing Sonic the Hedgehog 2 with my brother and sister was one of my earliest childhood memories as a kid. I know it's kind of a stereotype to be like, yeah man, I came out in the hospital room with a Genesis controller in my right hand and the 7 Chaos Emeralds in my left. But sitting down and playing that game in my parents' basement really was an early and significant memory for me. It was to the point where I was playing it before I could even properly read. For the longest time, I thought that the Mystic Cave Zone was actually a forest because I associated the green, purple, and brown color palettes with a stereotypical spooky forest and not a cave for some reason. Not to mention it was like the perfect little brother game. Give your gremlin of a sibling a controller so they feel like they're playing and helping, and then giggle to yourself as they die constantly because Tails can't keep up with Sonic. And then have them jump to their death to take on Robotnik without risking yourself and your precious rings. But what a place to start, right? Sonic the Hedgehog 2 was just so freaking solid for what it was. Move right across the stage, jump on robots, collect rings, get a high score, and a mini version of yourself that indicates that even if you shed your mortal coil, you'll evade the cold touch of death to live to fight another day at the cost of this homunculus. Sonic didn't have a bunch of crazy abilities that you had to upgrade or memorize. He just ran fast and jumped on stuff. The basic mechanics that were laid out before you at the beginning carried you out through the rest of the game. The real beauty and ingenuity of Sonic 2 instead came from the stages themselves. Every level was unique in its layout, color palette, enemies, and super iconic soundtrack. There were individual stage gimmicks and obstacles that you had to use your basic but solid toolkit to get through, and each stage had multiple paths to take that encouraged playing through it again to try and get better at it and to see what else there was to offer. Getting to the end of the stage with a bunch of rings and a low clear time was the goal and let you rack up a ton of points. And overall, Sonic 2 was just a real arcade kind of game. I think it's funny though that people always talk about how the original Sonic games were all about going faster than the speed of sound and how the modern games just have you going too slow as a result. And I think it's funny because when I go back and play these classic games, the concept really only applied to a very few select areas on stages. The chemical plant zone is probably the codifier. There's long stretches where you're just running down long pipes and bouncing off springs and whoa, Sonic, whoa, what up, Come on, dude, get back here. The screen can't keep up. But the real concept of speed in the early Sonic games came down to the platforming. Most stages had an upper, middle, and lower path you could take to get to the end. The upper path was the quickest and straightforward to the goal and usually had the most goodies, but it also required the best platforming because there were so many chances to fall down to the other paths. Meanwhile, the lowest path was usually a complete slog with plenty of enemies and spike traps, which made it more tedious. And finally, the middle path was something of a compromise between the two, with opportunities to get back up onto the upper path, but still chances to fall onto the lower path. And I'll be upfront in saying that I'm no Sonic 2 speedrunner. I played this game a lot as a kid, but even today, I'm not very good at it. There's only a few stages where I can consistently stay on the upper path, like the Aquatic Ruins level, one of my favorites. It's fun to think about just what Sonic 2 did for the franchise though. So many long-staying concepts were introduced and canonized by this game. It was sequel escalation in its purest form. You've got additional playable characters with the introduction of Tails. Actually, Tails was introduced on the Sega Game Gear, Sonic 2, not the Genesis. Shut up! You've got the Spin Dash, which wasn't even a thing in the original game. Seriously, try playing Sonic 1 after Sonic 2. The lack of Spin Dash is the weirdest sense of video game phantom limb syndrome. And getting all the Chaos Emeralds lets you turn into Super Sonic for the rest of the game, whereas previously, getting them all did literally nothing other than change the final cutscene. Like, really? You work that hard to get them all and that's what happens? What the fuck? And yet, as much as I love Sonic 2, it's not some perfect bit of history. When I used to play it as a kid, there was always a roadblock I hit where I'd usually give up. And replaying it as an adult, I often just stop at the same point because now I realize this is where the game stops being as fun for me. The last quarter of the game is where Sonic 2 starts to falter in my opinion, starting with the Metropolis Zone. If you want to talk about a level where there's no real speed, this is it. Metropolis is basically nothing but platforming, a couple of springs, and more spikes and enemies than you can shake a stick at. Holding on to more than one ring at a time is always a challenge for me here. The level is pretty slow paced despite having a catchy, upbeat soundtrack, and it's also the longest stage in the game, with 3 acts instead of 2. And no apparent reason for that either. Well, okay, there actually may be a reason why. The development of Sonic 2 went through a ton of changes, and the game was cut down significantly from what the team had originally envisioned, which was not limited to, but included the removal of many planned stages. Act 3 of Metropolis Zone was supposedly a holdover from an earlier plan where there was going to be another stage known as Genocide City, which was also changed in the naming because the Japanese developers didn't realize that the English word genocide is not synonymous with words like extermination or dangerous, and has a few more unfortunate connotations in how it's used, so maybe it's better if you just change the name to avoid that controversy. But seriously, my family used to think that this was the final level of the game when we were kids because of how tough it was and how long it was. Everything about it screamed endgame. But no, once you finally beat it and defeat Robotnik yet again, you kept going. And that is where, in my opinion, the quality of the game started to dip a little bit. The last couple of stages in Sonic 2 are completely different in scope and design than every level before them. You've got Sky Chase, which is just a serene journey on Tails' plane through the open air. It's an on-rail segment where the whole concept of try to beat the level as quickly as possible is thrown out the window because you no longer set the pace. And then you've got the Wing Fortress, which is a bit more of a return to form and has some tricky platforming over a constant death pit that is the sky, and ends with a weird Robotnik boss battle where you don't fight him directly for once. And also, if you've been playing a co-op game, guess what? Your partner is now gone. And then, the game gets into its finale on the Death Egg, where you fight a Metal Sonic boss and then the Death Egg robot final boss, all with no rings. No checkpoints either. Take a single hit, and you're dead. And, if you're on the Death Egg robot, this means fighting Metal Sonic again. Better get used to the death screens while you try to memorize Metal Sonic's attack patterns if this is your first time doing this stage. This whole last part of the game always just felt like a loss of momentum to me. Metropolis was too long and annoying, Sky Chase was too boring, Wing Fortress was sort of just a pain in the ass, and Death Egg was a gauntlet that was either annoyingly tough if you hadn't done it before, or super easy if you had. I feel like this last portion of the game was trying really hard to escalate towards a climactic final battle with Robotnik in space, and mixing up the formula the game had been using up until now was the attempted execution of that. But for me, it just didn't work. None of that to say is to say this still wasn't one of my favorite childhood games, it just means that I usually stop playing once I hit the Metropolis Zone. Sonic 2 is still a solid and fun game to this day that I think just about any age group can find enjoyable. I'm not one of those Sega Genesis era games are the only good Sonic games type of people, but I won't deny that they have maintained an ageless charm almost 20 years after their original release compared to their various 3D counterparts. I'd still recommend Sonic 2 to anybody. In fact, there was actually a remake released in 2013 developed by Christian Whitehead, the guy who would later do Sonic Mania, another fantastic game, and Simon Tomley, that adds a bunch of special goodies, previously cut content, and a few features from later games like letting Tails fly now. Check it out. But maybe if you're playing alone on the original version, consider turning it to Sonic Alone or Tails Alone, especially if you're going for the Chaos Emeralds. Because otherwise, Tails is gonna get you killed an annoying number of times. Leave me alone, you homicidal mutant fox son of a bitch.